So we will go ahead and begin. Let me do the introductions here. Let me just get us all back on the. Somehow we lost Mary again, but we'll get her in here in a few moments. Two of the three panelists are here. I'm Tim Rumage. I'm a professor of environmental studies at Ringling College of Art and Design, and I will be moderating this group. One of our speakers is the Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley, who is the pastor emeritus from Providence Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta. Hi, how are you? I think we have you now. I think so. And he's been involved with climate change, global warming, environmental justice for several years. While he was the pastor, he came into the field, combining the disciplines of faith, science, with lessons learned in the civil rights movement, and strongly feels that for the environment to be saved, basically we have to get our educational, scientific, business, and political faith communities to seek common solutions and talk to each other and share with each other. He has numerous awards. The three I will mention of the many are the White House Champion of Change Award, the Trailblazer Green Church Award, and the W.E.B. Du Bois NAACP Award of Distinction. He currently serves on the boards of the March of Dimes, Civil and Human Rights Global, the Civil and Human Rights Global Advisory, as well as for Interfaith Power and Light. DeWanda Smith-Soeder runs a company that deals with diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is a strategist helping Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 50 companies, as well as small businesses learn more about education, government, and also works with education government entities, looking at human organizational development, change management, instruction design, behavioral science, and emotional intelligence, and is an adjunct professor of organizational psychology. Mary Butler is native Sarasota. She's born and raised in Newtown. She is the president of the Amaryllis Park Neighborhood Association, and I don't know where my voice is going. She's been with that organization for about 11 years. She's currently the president. She has served as secretary and as the vice president, and has always been involved and passionate about community engagement for improving things. And so what we'll do is we will start with Reverend Dr. Durley, and then we will then switch to Mary Butler, and then we will close with DeWanda Smith-Soeder. So, Reverend Durley.
Thank you so much, Tim Rumage, and I want to thank being on here today. I'm quite honored to be here with Mary Butler and DeWanda Smith-Soeder. So many times we are thrown into gatherings, but I listened to them the other day and was very impressed with everything that they had to say. And to be on this particular panel today, it means a lot when we began to contrast the civil rights movement with what I call the environmental movement. It's very important. I joined up with Dr. King in 1960. Andy Young and John Lewis and all of us were there in Nashville. And I'll never forget that Dr. King, in his address at Washington, D.C. on August the 28th, 1963, 57 years ago, he said this, that America had given the African-American community, people of color, a promissory note, and that check came back with insufficient funds. There was not enough to back up what America had promised a group of people. What Dr. King was stating almost 60 years ago was the unfair, inequitable treatment of a people who were supposed to be under the constitutional rights and have the rights to liberty, justice, and the pursuit of happiness. And only 60 years ago, in the land of the free, home of the brave, when I first went to Nashville, Tennessee, talking about equity, and I came there, I was so excited to get to Tennessee State. And when I got on the bus coming from Colorado, the man told me to get behind that white line. you don't ride in the front of this bus. I got off of the bus and began to drink water. He said, you don't drink out of that water fountain. There's another water fountain for you, marked colored. And I began to look at the inequities around employment, lower wages, harder work, and then educational opportunities where we were using secondhand books. The schools were too hot during the summer and cold during the winter. You began to see the inequities that would be pronounced in this during the civil rights movement. We looked at, as we talked about, the strategies that we used in the civil rights movement and how applicable are they as we move into this whole area of environmental justice and trying to mitigate against climate change. The laws in those days, we said, let's try something called nonviolent movement. We chose to do this even in the face of all challenges, when people didn't understand us, like in the movement of the environmental movement. Oftentimes when we're out talking about fracking, when we're talking about carbon dioxide, when we talk about putting profits over people, people really don't understand. But we faced the same thing during the civil rights movement. And we understood that in order for any kind of change to occur, we had to understand the power of the vote. I'll never forget when John, who represented us from SNCC, went up there in 1963, and he was only 22 years old, and we stood there, and he talked about the vote to bring about change. And there were three things that I think that we can learn from the civil rights movement that are quite applicable today. We organize, we strategize, and we mobilize. In order for something to go, and I began to see how can we take what we did then and make it applicable today. We organized around the same principles that were against the constitutional rights that we had been denied. When I look at the cancer road down there in St. John the Baptist Parish down in Louisiana, where they've got 85 miles of all of the toxic waste dumps and the diseases that are negatively disproportionately impacting that community, I said, we've got to organize there. When I look at the 9th Ward in Louisiana, when I look at the hog devastation in North Carolina, the same kind of atrocities that were occurring there, it was unfair. And I began to look at, we fought for constitutional rights. And in the environmental movement, that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're fighting for constitutional rights. Everybody should have the right to toxic-free air and clean water and not having toxic waste dumps in the neighborhood, fracking with all the methane that's coming from the ground. We all have a constitutional right to that. We all have a constitutional right to stop all of the contributors that cause wildfires and droughts and hurricanes and tornadoes. Those were constitutional rights. So I began to try to understand, and I met with several people, Al Gore and Ted Turner, who I work with here in Atlanta, and Laura Seidel. We started talking about how do we take what we did then and make it live today. That is why I think this, when we talk about inequities, we've got to talk about. I see very little difference in what we were doing there for strategies in terms of organizing, in terms of letting it live in people's lives. Unfortunately, when I got involved 8 or 9 years ago in the environmental movement, I met some very smart people. I met some very well-off people. I met some people, but they were white people who were very dull. They were dull. They didn't excite me. You got to be excited about if the earth is being destroyed. They were dull. And I said, I don't want to be bothered. I could care less about a polar bear. I'm not interested. I've got to deal with police brutality. I've got to deal with inequities in terms of rent controls and gentrification. And they would talk, and they would always be talking about the devastation in the Black community, but there were no Black people there. There were no Latinos there. And I said, unless there's some level of diversity and inclusion, it's going to be another talking show around this. Right now with Biden and everybody's talking about saving the soul of America. I'm convinced now the soul of America is really the environment, because everything moves around the environment. It is colorblind when you destroy the environment. Animals and bees and the weather, it's all around the environment. So if we're going to save America, we got to save the environment, because the environment is the soul of America. Plants and animals and bees and all of these, that's the soul of America. And I thought about several R's that we could do in the letter R from the alphabet. If we're really serious about saving the soul of America, and the soul is the environment, then all of us must come together. It's not about you into water, me about air, this person about the soil, this person about the weather. It's all integrated into an environmental concept. So we've got to understand that in order to save, the political people say the soul of America. And I deal with souls in my profession, but I'm talking about the soul, meaning the environment. We've got to resurrect it. In other words, giving it a new life. We've got to redeem it by bringing it back. We've got to restore it by giving some hope. We've got to refocus it by stop doing what we've done before and do something differently. We've got to reconsecrate this environment, making it our new #1 priority, and then redirect it. And I believe that when we resurrect, redeem, restore, refocus, reconsecrate, and then we will redirect our minds and our hearts, because that's where everything starts. Everything starts with a thought. All I'm doing with you right now is sharing a thought, and your thought will become your words, and your words will become your behavior, and your behavior becomes your actions, and your actions become your habits, and then your values. Our values come out of that, and that's our destiny. Our destiny is to mitigate against climate change, but we've got to be excited about it. I'm not talking about Pollyannish excitement, but I'm talking about putting things in the proper perspective, organizing, strategizing, voting, and then mobilizing. We have given this up now. So now when you come through all those R's, we got to come to the one. We've got to reclaim. We've got to reclaim the environment. That will be the soul of America. And then finally, when we do all of those R's, there's one final one. We got to rejoice. There's got to be some joy. And in the old days, and I was speaking the other day about it, we talk about rallying the troops. A rally is not a strategy session. A rally is when you get in there and you know that you're right, that your cause is right, that you will not bend, back up, bow, nor break. We've got to rally all of those Black and white and Latinos and those in the business world and the politicians to know that none of us, Dr. King says, none of us will be free. None of us will find the freedom that we need unless we're all free. And we do that through a constant loving each other, understanding each other, respecting each other. And then finally, the big one, if the environmental movement is to have the kind of emphasis that we had there, we've got to trust each other. When we marched, we trusted whoever came, we got together. We know the statistics. I could get on here as well as some of my colleagues and talk about the statistics, talk about all of those things, and talk about the political nuances. But until we go down inside and say, I'm willing to do two things. And I finished with this, two things that made us strong, and I believe those same two things will carry us in 2020. We were willing to sacrifice, and we were willing to risk. What are we willing to sacrifice now to save this environment, to save the soul of America? And what are we willing to risk? When we can sacrifice and risk and take everything that we're learning at this summit, we will be strong. And that's why I say, whenever I close any of my meetings, I chair the board of Interfaith Power and Light. I'm the chair. We're in 40 states, 22,000 houses of worship. I say this, never forget, we're on the winning team. I've got two colleagues on here with me today, and they are both winners. And Tim's a winner. I want you to be a winner as we go into this next period. When the new administration comes in power, we've got to be there to be supporting them in all ways, and we will be. And remember this, we'll be on the winning team. Thank you so much. Stay strong. Don't back up.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so very much. Mary, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to ask you to pause for a few moments. We'll go to DeWanda and we'll make sure that we've got your system up and running properly here, if that's okay.
Okay, good afternoon, all, and thank you, Reverend Dr. Durley, for your presentation. Very impactful. And I'm going to dovetail onto what you were talking about and talk a little bit or focus on resiliency from the standpoint of equity, racial equity in particular, and individual action. My work, as Tim mentioned, is primarily within organizations, corporate organizations and nonprofit organizations. And it's primarily focused on both individuals within those organizations as well as the overall system of the organization. When I look at resiliency, I am looking at it as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And when we talk about the challenges connected to the environment, climate change, and other environmental challenges that we have, recognizing that we have in our country a historical background of placing particularly brown and Black people in situations that have left them, in many cases, geographically stuck, if you would, in areas that are most prone to these environmental hazards or these environmental aspects. And as a result of continued exposure, along with the issues of racist policies, racial ideas, and racial inequities, they have left many of us in a position of very low, if not any at all, resiliency to fight, if you would, against those implements. So when I come to the table, and I'm sitting at the table in terms of the environment, I'm sitting to speak to organizations, government entities that are working programmatically on environmental issues, them to incorporate, if you would, the individual impacts of the environment, how it has traumatically, in many cases, impacted the resiliency of the individual. And what do I mean by that? One who is consistently impacted by or adversely impacted by trauma or tragedy or these other implements that come along with environmental hazard. What it does to an individual is it breaks down their ability to cognitively see success, to cognitively tap into their self-motivation and self-determination. And many people want to depend upon the person's ability to strong or to fight. And my response is that once a person has been repeatedly subjected to tragedy, to trauma, in an environment, as I said earlier, where they are stuck and under conditions where they cannot overcome those conditions because of the systemic racial and inequality issues that are existent in our society, it depletes the person. So if I am an organization or I am an entity, a government entity that's working on pulling together programs and to address these issues, I must also not only address the societal issue, but I have to look at this holistically and focus on, and I also have to take care of the individuals that are impacted. I also have to look at the groups that are impacted, and along with the societal impacts. So for instance, developing a program, a housing program, let's say, for a community, a vulnerable community. And as I said, most of our vulnerable communities are filled with people of color, underserved communities. When preparing or developing a program for that community, it is not sustainable to just focus on the assets and the economics of the program. But we also have to include the individuals that are within those communities that are impacted by those environmental hazards. Because when we talk about sustainability, we're not only talking about the program being sustainable, but at the end of the day, we want to help develop and reinforce the individual resiliency within the individual, so that the next time the hurricane comes along, the next time the pandemic comes along, the next time there is any kind of environmental strife that impacts that community, the individuals within that community have been given ways and supported in ways that they can not only recover and sustain beyond their recovery. So as I said, when you're planning and implementing any resiliency-based program, you have to remember that we're not just doing a program for the community. We are doing a program with the community and through a racial equity lens. Without that, sustainability is not available to us, if you would. So looking at resiliency from the individual and the group and the societal society with a is really taking to this issue of environmental challenges. And when you are developing your program, when you're working with communities, you want to explain what I mean by that. We have to take into consideration the ways that people think, how they feel, what their beliefs are, which they operate, and then also are those stress levels or those stressful environmental impacts that they have been exposed to. And not only looking at it from, as I said, the individual, but also the groups and the communities that we are attempting to serve. And we need to consider the differences in perspectives between whites and people of color and indigenous people of color. Recognize and make sure that those issues are on the table as we work to plan and develop our programs. And then from a community and standpoint, we need to take into consideration the culture of people, their languages, their norms, their values, how their family compositions are, religious and spiritual beliefs, the degree of racial and ethnic identity within each one of those groups that influence and shape their lives. And at the end of the day, if we are doing our environmental work to people and to the communities as opposed to with and through, we are not headed towards sustainability or sustainable change, I should say. So we have to make policy response to issues work for both the people and the planet. And that's the core challenge that we have currently in making sure that we develop a sustainable agenda around the environment. We're often missing the analysis of how those, so we have to look at economic and environmental systems and how they shape the outcomes of policies and interventions, and make sure that we're recognizing that when we're doing this work, we are influencing resiliency across different scales. And that's primarily my focus, or as I said, when I come to the table in regards to the environment and resiliency, I am, while I see holistically the picture, I am very much focused at the individual level in helping organizations, government entities, and those who are working for change to recognize that there also is that individual resiliency piece. And without restoring the resiliency within individuals, disservice to helping them or supporting them to sustain and through whatever programs that we are putting out there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We seem to be having some technical difficulty with Mary Butler's internet. I know that that's being worked on, but in the meantime, let me just ask a few questions. Or well, first, do either of you have a comment that you want to make about each other's presentation, or a question about that?
I would like to make a comment about Dr. Soeder has said, and I think it's so critically important, the resiliency of the individual, because individuals make up systems, and it's so important. And I guess it's something that I'm very much concerned about, and as she is, I'm a psychologist as well. I found out the first 3 degrees, I was a psychologist, and I found out something was missing. All of those degrees and talking about all of that, but I had to come back and find the spiritual aspect to bring the two together. But it's so important to give that resilience, to bring something called hope. And right now we're living almost in a hopeless society of divided nature, and the hopelessness that she was moving toward and talking about the resilience. When you're hopeless, it leads toward depression, and depression can move towards suicide, and we've got to stay away from that. When the individuals have been just battered by the climate change and the political situation and the educational system, it all comes together. And that's why the environment engulfs all of that. But we can never forget, as she was saying, the individual person involved in that, because individuals create institutional racism. It just didn't come out of the sky. It's individuals, and they base it primarily upon their fear of losing power. And we should share power so we can all win.
Thank you very much. I see that we have Mary. So Mary, let me go ahead.
Can you hear me?
And if you...
Oh, finally.
I can hear you.
I know.
Thank you. Thank you for doing all
Ooh,
this.
I've been working it, y'all. I've been working it. Oh my goodness. So, okay. Are you ready for me? Okay, y'all. I'm sorry about the delay. I ended up going to another computer, and so I had a PowerPoint, and it's on my desktop, and so I'm on my laptop. But I'll just share about what we're doing. Basically, in our community, I'm in Amaryllis Park Neighborhood Association, and I'm the president, and my name is Mary Butler. And so basically, we just started noticing a lot of dust off of Myrtle Avenue. And so a few of us got together and just started having these conversations about it. And the more people that came around, the more we wanted to do something. So what we ended up doing is working with Dr. Lisa with the Multicultural Health Institute and some other concerned citizens. So what we were able to do was just go out and talk to people that cared about this. Who cares about the environment? We ended up meeting with the health department. We also ended up meeting with the Estuary Bay. They were there. And we also got a chance to speak to some environmentalists. And so there was some data that was put out based on the county zip code. And our zip code 34234, when we took a look at those health disparities, we saw that our zip code basically had like the highest numbers of everything. One of the ones I will point out was like asthma. And we noticed that people from our zip code was going to the emergency room 3 and 4 times as many as other residents of other zip codes in Sarasota County. So with that being said, we started having regular meetings. We formed a small group. We began to have regular meetings and trying to figure out what we can do. We also reached out to our city and county commissioners. We had meetings with them. We met with the health department, and they all were too concerned, and they were very happy, that we reached out to them. So what we ended up doing is having those meetings. And after we had those meetings, we had some concerned citizens, and my PowerPoint was about some pictures that we had taken. And once again, I'm so sorry, but we got a chance to go out there and take a look at the dust particles. Literally, if you drive by there, you can actually see the dust just flying everywhere. And so some of the photos that we actually took one of those signs that flashes for the school, because it's right next to Booker High School. And we just did a little finger swipe, and you could just see all the dust on our fingers. We also went around the neighborhood and we talked to neighbors, and they were concerned too. One gentleman had a car in the back of his yard, and once again, if you just swipe that car, all the dust was basically on your hand from that car. So with that being said, once we had actually got a chance to go out there, take these pictures, we sent them back to the county and the others that are involved. And it was pretty cool. It was really cool. And one of the other things we ended up doing is we actually had a community conversation. We wanted the community to know what's going on in our neighborhoods. And about 100 people showed up to that event, and it was just a community conversation. We had tables set up. Of course, we want to make sure people are happy. We had refreshments, but we also got a chance to have community citizens and residents come out and just talk about the health disparities, what they see, the environment, and the conversations were wonderful. As we continue to talk about the different, it's an industrial park right there at Myrtle. It's between Myrtle from about Osprey Avenue, a little, and all past Orange Avenue. So that's the area that we were focused on. And so the data that we found is some of those industrial companies had been there since like the 1960s. And people were concerned because they had been out there for so long and nobody had really said anything. And so once again, the health department was very glad. So I'll move on to outcomes. So after we had the community conversations, after we met with the county, the commissioners, or at least one or two of the city commissioners and the county commissioners. So they ended up putting together a fugitive dust report. And they took a look at the dust and they made some recommendations. One of the slides that I had, it basically showed these big mounds that they were using over there. And so the outcome was they were able to move the mounds away from the road because they were so close to the road. Also, one of the companies we found out had been cited 4 times. And so when we brought up our issue, the county health department went back to them and had more conversations. Little bit by little bit, we started to see changes over there. And today, when you go over there, you don't see the dust flying as much. So we're very proud that we became proactive in our community to help build a healthier community. And so the last thing I want to share with you is that we, out of all of this, the outcome was the leadership environmental program. And so hopefully by the end of this year, we'll be able to get this program off the road, up and started. So the program is basically about citizens that are concerned about their environment, and it's going to be like a workshop. And for, I think, 8 to 10 weeks, we'll have about 30 either residents come. We want residents to come. We also want to invite our neighborhood association. We're very close to Bayou Oaks and Central Coconut. And so the environmental leadership program are just going to address those issues that the residents have in their neighborhood. And so we're looking forward to having this program and having the community come out and learn more about the environment. And at the end of our program, we're actually going to put some stuff together, and we're actually going to work on some environmental issues. Okay.
Well, that's great. I know you said you had a slideshow. If you send that to us or send it to me, we will make it. If you want, we can make it available to anybody who requests it, so that they can have a better visual sense of of the issue as you're explaining it. Because I'm sure everybody's creating their own finger of dust, but what the real finger of dust happens is probably something they really need to know. So yeah, very, okay.
I'm home.
There are some overlapping comments in looking at the comments people made in the chat. people like the idea of going to the degree and actually committing, as you say, to reconsecrating nature, that depth of commitment, and seeing the soul of the country as in the environment. Also concerns about making sure that as people desire to help or want to help, that that they are working with people in the community, not imposing anything on communities, but that really, as Mary, you're talking about, having the community be the driver, and DeWanda along that same line of how do we build up the resiliency in communities, so that people can ensure that the decisions that are made are in fact their decisions and appropriate for the issues that they're dealing with. And again, we were, before you came back in, Mary, we were having the opportunity for the three of you to share comments and insights about each other's presentation. I think, DeWanda, was there anything you would wanted to say sort of in response to what Reverend Durley had said, or?
No, I think,
about,
I think he did a great job of tying our talk together, in that at the root of all of this are people. And we need to make sure that we don't forget that piece. We don't stay up at the programmatic level and without inviting and connecting the people and their resiliency, developing their resiliency as we go through the process of addressing environmental issues. And then with Mary, I mean, what a great example of community-driven change in terms of an environmental issue. And I would just ask Mary to let us know, if she could, when is the Leadership Environment Program scheduled to start?
Well, due to COVID-19, yeah. So we're probably looking at 2021. But right now, what we are doing is meeting with people. We're having conversation with those that are interested in the program. So if there's anybody that's interested, please let me know, and then I can reach out to them, so we can actually start getting people that want to participate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Now, you had said that you all have been able to make a great deal of progress, and that the dust isn't blowing the same way it had before. Are you aware, or is the county or the city going to go the rest of the way and actually get rid of the dust?
But like I said, those companies have been over there. We found out some have been there since the 1960s. So no, it's probably not going to go completely away. But one of the things that I've noticed, there is a fence there, and they put like the blue tarp on the fence. And another thing that when we were talking about, as far as how we can help solve this problem, it was also to put a barricade up there, or at least put some trees up there, to help block the dust from coming, towards the high school and in the road. So while we're still working on completely, eliminating all of the dust, some measures have been taken. And the good thing is that these companies know that we are there and we are watching, and that we are very concerned about our environment.
Two quick comments along that with you, Mary. First is that people want to know that they want to say hi to your dog. For that.
I see. Her name is Star.
Okay, and there also a question if the three of you, individual decisions, but if you're willing to share your contact information, so if people have follow-up questions or want to see with Mary about being involved in your project, in your neighborhood's activities, whether or not there's a way to contact you and if they could be of assistance. And so if you wish to do that, you may, and then they can contact you individually.
I wanted to say,
yes,
I saw one of the comments there on the thing, and I think all of us were very much concerned. If we're to have the sustainability that we want, we must systematically get young people involved. I have never been so optimistic when I saw all of the marching around the country, even though it came from a negative stimulus, George Floyd. But I saw young whites and young blacks and all kinds of different faiths coming together. And I think I saw a comment, how do we get young people involved? It's not hard. I think young people want to be involved, but for some reason, us old folks, we tend to say we think we have some of the answers. If we open up the doors and say, come in and give us your idea. What do you think about this? You'll be surprised. They will come in and share all kinds of information. And we might have tried it before, but maybe trying it this time their way will make a difference. But at least they will feel that they're appreciated, they're respected, that they're just not some afterthought. And I think that that's what, particularly in the environment, where they can get involved. And when we're doing water keepers and going out among lakes and getting them out there in the water, in the urban areas, one of the things that we're doing, I never thought I'd see so many young African-American children excited about urban gardens, growing vegetables inside of the city and what those vegetables mean. And we might think, well, they're not concerned about that. I thought about that with my granddaughter. She said, Granddad, what is this? And she got me excited about, she said, look, you know, you ask a kid in the city, where does milk come from? They say from a carton. No, it's from a cow. But they can learn those things. And if we get them involved and make them feel that they have something to offer, it might not make much sense, but it will. And I just happen to see that. How do we get young people involved? And I think it's going to be a lot of opportunities for this, now that this new administration begins to open up things where we can all be respected from our different perspectives.
I would agree, and part of what we need with all of these conversations is the multiple perspectives. You know, nobody, and we have not been effective in encouraging that or supporting the highly diverse conversations. You know, as Reverend, you were pointing out early on, it was people were interested in like one topic. You know, and to solve this, it is about how all of these things interlink, and then how do you solve it in the context of everything being interlinked, and that is something that I think a lot of the environmental community has not focused on. You know, so yeah, we really do need to change in mindset, and again, your concept of working to the joy, you know, is very important. That, you know, if we want to do this, we want to be successful, individuals need to see progress. They need to be respected for their contribution, and we need, as Mary's group has shown, you know, celebrating the success, you know, and have that emotional reinforcement. Okay. Do any of you have some additional closing comments, because we are running up on time?
I just wanted to add. I wanted to add to Dr. Durley's, Reverend Dr. Durley's comment, and the comment of getting youth involved. There is also an intergenerational conversation that needs to happen around all of these issues. So one of the things that is very important when we start to have a conversation, and I'm sure Mary has having this experience in her program, we need to make sure that we are looking for diverse voices to be around the table. And, you know, many times when we think about diversity, we only think about race and gender. We don't think about age or generation and how important it is to have all of those voices at the table. And so as we're pulling together whatever the program is or whatever the effort is, we need to make sure that, you know, when we have as many diverse voices connected to the effort possible. And Mary, I love the idea of inviting other surrounding neighborhood associations to your group, because, you know, it's important for us also to step out of our boxes, if you would. It's because at the same time that we are addressing the environmental issues, we are also addressing, as I said earlier, developing, and people learn by doing and being a part of the effort.
And Mary, there's an old verse that says, "Be ye not weary in well-doing, for you'll reap in due season if you faint not." And it doesn't sound like you're about to faint at all.
Love it. I love it. Thank you.
Well, I thank all three of you for participating, and it has been most illuminating and insightful, and I hope that we could take your advice and do a much better job of creating the changes that we need. As Christy quickly just reminded me, you know, resurrect, redeem,
Restore,
rejoice, refocus,
resurrect, redeem, restore, refocus, reconsecrate, redirect, and then reclaim, and then rejoice. Resurrect, redeem, restore, refocus, reconsecrate, redirect, reclaim, and then rejoice. Never leave out the rejoicing. Never.
And what a great note to end on. So I thank you all very much.
Thank you for having
me. Thank you, DeWanda and Mary. Y'all stay strong. Love you both. Y'all be blessed.
Thank you.